So welcome back everybody, this is Paul again, and today I'm going to go into some more, I guess this is our fifth in our series about esoteric studies. And what I've been doing is trying to assemble bits and pieces of ancient esoteric teachings that I've read about and learned and everything, combined with modern science and things that I learned about. I'm not a scientist per se, I don't have an academic degree, but I have listened to an awful lot of really expert professional people and gathered what they've had to say. So a lot of what I repeat here is things that I've learned and assembled and combined with some things about esoteric teachings. A lot of people don't know that esoteric teachings have a lot to do with number and geometry and motion and some really profound cosmic concepts that get us to understand our process of thinking, because as I've mentioned in the other episodes and many times, and it's very common knowledge now that basically the universe is one consciousness. There's a non-local, non-judgmental, there's just a consciousness in this universe, which is basically everything that exists. There really isn't anything but that existence, and you can't really partition it, because if you want to try to, how can you cut the ocean, how can you cut a river, you can't divide the wholeness of the universe and put one piece over there and another piece over there. So we have to understand that basically, as we had mentioned, there's like a 3-in-1 situation going on if you look at it on a conceptual basis, because you have the one completion of everything, and then if there's vibration or motion in that, it doesn't, you can't put this piece over there. It's a perceptual division, basically what comes down to polarity, plus and minus or whatever. Those are just symbols, okay? There's a charge, there's a movement, and this is a principle that any electronic and engineer and so on, it's just like, it's profound. It goes right down to the elemental level, the atomic level, the macro level, that somehow polarity was established, and then polarity brings rotation and spin and all that, and from spin we can, waves, and you get a whole assembly of the materials and the elements, and then they grow basically just like the example of a tree, how things grow. You look at a tree, you put the seed in there, and it might take years. In our life, we just say you wait for a few years, and finally after 5 or 6 years you finally get a few apples, and then over time, the next generation, they have a whole tree full of apples. So this cosmos that we live in is constantly incrementally growing, and it's incrementally dissolving. And there's some very important concepts that I'm going to explain here. There's a lot of processes in nature that involve polarity and electric force. Electric force can accomplish so many things. It's amazing where electricity is found in this cosmos. And now the new theory is really basically proven by, I'm a very big fan of the electric universe. That's a whole other thing, and there's experts in that you can listen to online. But we have coalescence and repulsion. We have things that come together. We have things that repel. We have compression. We have expansion. We have inductance and capacitance, conductivity and resistance, coil, superconducting. You have diffusion and concentration. And all these processes involve some kind of polarity and some kind of movement, and so all these processes involved in how things get assembled and dissolved. This huge, immense cycle of the cosmos. So now, I'm not an expert in magnetism, but I've certainly listened to some amazing guys out there, and women too, people who know their stuff, and I just listen, and you can't study everything, but if you listen to some of the top experts, and then you can just start, okay, I want to learn, you just go to the best and listen to some of these experts online, and you can get a lot from them. So basically, our perception, I keep talking about perception because we have to augment our perception and enhance our perception, and there's different ways to do that. There's a lot of different ways that increase our ability to perceive. One is just, first of all, we have to start to think out of the box to know that we actually do have ways to expand our perception, and there's a lot of different ways, and everyone's unique, so each person is going to have their own beam of light, you might say, shining on to wherever they're looking at, but there's a need to understand that we can actually do that. We can actually really enhance it. So magnetism, very much a part of this electromagnetism, huge, huge, huge. Okay, you have in the cosmic esoteric teachings, it really comes down to a few really, really basic forces and manifestations of those types of forces. There's, I think the whole gravity thing, I'm not an expert, but everything I've listened to in my own understanding and feeling is that there's something missing in understanding of gravity, and it has to do with electrogravitics, and there's some very experienced people out there talking about that now. But basically, the electric force and magnetic force are connected, and light is electromagnetic. So it basically, the influence of polarity manifests in multiple different ways across this cosmos that we live in, including in our own body. We have the two eyes, we have the two ears, we have the two hands. Our job is to synthesize through perception. We have a synthesizing perception. We have two sides of our brain, and again, there's a time when things start to be diversified. You feel like the ultimate cosmic material, you might say, that starts to manifest itself from the subtler and subtler and subtler into the greater and greater and more dense, and then eventually gets down to the radioactive elements that they start to dissipate and dissipate and dissipate and dissipate, and everything flows back into this whole thing. There's nothing else outside the universe. The universe doesn't have a garbage pit where you say, okay, here's my trash, let's toss it over there. It has to be dissolved back into the elements completely. So, assembly and dissolution. Now, I want to talk a lot more about perception because, again, we're the synthesizing agent. We have two sides of our brain, and we have two eyes, and we can see perspective. And there's that process that many beings have two eyes and two arms, and there's a universal type of duality that is needed to function, to walk, to move, and so on. So, magnets. Now, I'm going to demonstrate a few basic really things, but see, you can learn so much. Again, observation. If we have good observation that's observable, magnetism is observable. See, you have these things here, and you can just play with them and say, okay, this one doesn't go like that. It has to go back that way, and you can't put this one this way. And a child can figure stuff out like that. Say, well, this is very interesting. Now, when you get further along and say, the higher level of college or something, you start studying stuff like that, well, okay, you can get current, electromagnetic, or electric current to flow, and you can stack it in a certain way because these won't fit together, like they won't go right on the top of each other, but they'll go between. So you have like an alternating north-south, so on. So all of these little things that we can observe in the way, for example, this structure is made, you have a different kind of a magnet, and then, they'll go together a certain way, and you can't put them a certain way. See, you can experiment, and you can feel the repulsion. See, there's attraction and repulsion. So when you start thinking about these really, really fundamental, observable, basic, simple types of phenomena, and then you extrapolate through our own synthesizing brain and looking at the teachings that we've got from many thousands of years, then you come to a lot of really amazing conclusions. You don't need an iPhone or Google to figure some of these things out, at least get very far along the way. So previous cultures, they may have not had an iPhone or whatever, they had different kinds of technology, but in some manner they managed to use either electromagnetic forces or static electricity or the flow of water or the electrodynamic characteristics of water and so on. Now, I want to get back to what we were talking about in one of the other videos called intrinsic memory, and I'll just briefly cover a couple of books here. The various phases of the elements, the healing power of energized water. See, water has a very, very, very interesting properties. It's one of the elements. There's energized water, there's stages of water, there's magnetized water, you see, and there's water. Water is one of the ways that the intrinsic memory is kept. The messages that a certain wave or a certain frequency or a certain magnetic influence will happen over a pair of water, and then it'll magnetize the water. So there's the tradition of like spiritualizing water or getting special healing water. If you go to a stream where it's aerated and so on, if you go to the ocean where it has the salt and the aeration, the foam, you have water in many different aspects is a fundamental, like I said, it has many different phases, so there's water in different phases, as you said. So quickly, these books, a lot of people know about them already. Rocks and minerals. If you look at a rock and a mineral, see, just like the intrinsic memory, for example, if you look at a fender of a car and it has a big dent in it, then there's people who can analyze, okay, the dent is a memory of something that happened. You see, you can analyze it, say, well, there's a certain angle or a certain shape that had to hit it a certain way, at a certain force to make that kind of a dent. So when we observe in nature, there's recordings in crystals, the way you can see like magma, that swirling rock, and then it cooled and it cooled into a swirl. You see, there's preserving and showing and demonstrating the process of nature through the ways that crystals assemble and so on. Ratios and patterns and proportions are very, very important. And again, observing in nature. This is a fantastic book called Power of Limits. Wow. You see, even throughout nature, all these same exact proportions. Isn't that amazing? Right down, the microcosm to the microcosm, in the shape of a fish, in the shape of a pineapple, in the shape of a snowflake. All these patterns repeat and repeat and repeat, and, you know, life. You know, so what we're saying is there's memory inherent and intrinsic into the fabric of the cosmos in various ways. There's various patterns and various minerals and various substances that can record, you might say, like a crystal. Okay, we know that silicon can record and so on. So all this is very, very fascinating, and people observed this, and then they made their own temples and their own statues and everything using all these amazing geometric ratios and principles. Flow, our awareness needs to flow. This is real briefly here. That's something psychological, the timeless zone of our own experience, where essentially our awareness doesn't have time. We can get into a flow of awareness beyond time. That's very well known. Quickly, John Horgan, The End of Science. Been quite a long time ago. I read this way back a long time ago. Facing the limits of knowledge. See, you know, how much do we really know? Do we even know our limits? Now, Genesis of the Cosmos, again, I talk a little bit about astrology, because essentially talk about observation. They observed the stars for a really, 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 really long time. Obviously they did, because the oldest buildings that we can find on this planet are a lot of them are astronomically aligned, and some of them are just like stone circles and stuff. They didn't build a big structure. Maybe they couldn't, but they certainly knew where east was or wherever. So profound knowledge was found by observation, and what they did was, you have like, this is a very popular book, and he arranged these. The constellations were observed. I mean, you can imagine how this is like the canopy of TV. Imagine being out in the open and you have no physical lights whatsoever, nothing, no flashlight, nothing. And you're sitting out there, and after thousands of years, people got to know stuff. They saw these patterns, and they said, okay, well, this time of year we notice this, and the wind comes from here, and there's this kind of light, and the moon does this, and Venus is over here, and they just wrote down. It just took a long time to study all that. That's why astrology was the format before people watch the stars from the point of view of astrology, you might say, which is called a different kind of astrology, not the personal chart that we say, oh, you know, you're going to have like a great day or whatever, retire or flat or whatever. But instead, they had like a sense of the energy behind the cosmos. When you look at, if you sit on a desert and you go out and look at the Milky Way and you see that big rift there and you go, holy cow, like, whoa. Imagine seeing that every night, all night long. You wake up and you walk out to go to the bathroom and you look up in the sky, you practically faint because it's just so awesome. So obviously these people thought it was important, and that's one of the things that we have inheritance from the ancient times is the monitoring of the sky. Now this is a guy, really fascinating guy, Swaller de Levis, one of the earlier analysis of the Egyptian temples and so on. See, again, here we go, the bifurcated brain, the symbol, you have the integrating, they knew all this stuff. They knew the ratios and all that. They put it all in geometry. The geometry showed purpose. It was aligned. There's another thing about the brain. So this particular temple he's talking about here was an analysis and overlay, if you can see here, of the human being in this temple, so that the pineal gland was in a certain place, and everything was, you know, it's just an amazing book about the way they designed that particular temple as an outer representation of the human body. Amazing. So the sacred science, again, the Egyptians, they really were into the afterlife, and they got, you know, the stuff that they were talking about. We have a hard time, we can't really interpret it. It's so difficult to understand exactly what they're talking about, because some of them were written down, things that were, they were just written down. They weren't necessarily what they personally knew. The priests or sometimes you copy something, you don't really know what you're copying, but you at least know basically what you're copying, but you don't know the details or something. So look into the sacred science of Egypt. Science of the Spoken Word. I mentioned this book before. I'll go into that more when we go into other parts of human practice of esoteric teachings involving speech and so on. Again, the way that we've come down to, here's mundane astrology. This is what it was all about back in the way they set up the buildings. You see, this is not about, you know, when's your dog going to die or something. This is about, like, you know, if you're going to found a foundation, if you're going to establish a city, or if you're going to do any cosmic, really powerful event or something, you want to know, you know, what's going on with the cosmos. You know, how much light there is, and where the different planets are, and the angles and everything. So this got very, very sophisticated. That's why they spend so much time building those really, really accurate temples. Again, here's more symbolism. The genesis of the cosmos. The tarot cards, by the way, I mean, there's so many different versions of them now, but essentially there's a lot of elements in the tarot cards that are basically have to do with some of these really cosmological principles of the math and the numbers, and 3 and 4 make 7, and how they combine. And I mean, there's just an immense amount of symbolism in the tarot cards. birth of a new physics. Again, some of these ancient people like Galileo and Kepler and Newton, they all studied the stars. That's how they got into it. They were trying to figure out astronomy and astrology, mundane, and then they were actually observing the stars, not just for the fun of it. They were trying to figure out, like Isaac Newton apparently had a fascination with when the end of the world was going to come, and he was trying to figure out, well, how many times we have to go around the galaxy before the end of the world or something. So some of the sciences that we have now were born from people who conceptualize things like this, you see. Worlds inside worlds and all that. So fascinating stuff. Now, covered quite a lot about here. I'm going to go through a couple more books real briefly here. Galactic Alignment, again, many of the original teachings had to do with the stars, and when people, were to set up a town or they want to set up a camp, or they would start to find out, well, where are we? Okay, they want to know, okay, what latitude are they on? And so they make a monument and say, whoever comes here, they'll know that this is what was going on back then. This was the alignment and everything. So they had ways of conveying to the distant generations. Freemasonry came much later. These are very recent compared to these ancient teachings I'm talking about. There's places in India and Tibet that go back many thousands of years. Freemasonry is just a European thing. It's like in the last 1,000 years or so. That's nothing really. But they were trying to carry on a tradition. Now everything gets infiltrated. Of course, any organization can get infiltrated, and not everybody in them is like a saint or anything. So it's just the certain truths about geometry and ratio and all those kind of things do in fact stay the same. But the personalities involved, they just, whatever, Now, if anyone interested in astrology, get into this guy, Reinhold Ebertin, Combination of Sterile Influences. This guy did some serious midpoints and, the angles. If you really want to get into detailed astrology, you got to get your calculator out or computer, because you start getting into midpoints and various types of angles and exact alignments, things like that. So, good book. Now, I've covered a lot here, and I don't have a lot of time to get into a lot of perception, but as far as perception, just remember, we have to synthesize what we learn, and to join something back together to be one. Now, that's hard because we have that little thing in the way that says, okay, well, I separate my information and my consciousness from, you get fractured. So that's why a lot of the science gets fractured and people don't understand. There's a lot of really simple things that are very profound that any child can understand, but modern science has that kind of split between understanding that, this is a phrase I'll leave this video with here soon years. The perceiver and the perceived are one. That's hard for people to understand. You try to understand, like, try to imagine this. I'll give you this last example. There's a tiny veil that little veil is this thing that says I am, not I am just alone, but I am something. We have consciousness. We have that point in the center. That's what we have. It doesn't need a fill in the blank. Because when we drop that sense of separateness, we drop that limited part of us, we realize that our thoughts are not just our thoughts about different things are not the ultimate reality, but the awareness, the being that can think, the being that can perceive is real. So when we rest, we basically, like a turtle folds all up into its own shell. We fold ourselves up into our inner self. Then we take a place of observation from the point of view of unity. You see, then when we see everything through, when we perceive everything through unity, we realize that in fact the perceiver and the perceived are one. Our own little mini identity is just a shadow. It's just a flickering little butterfly. It's just almost nothing. So we're actually we let go of something tiny and ephemeral, and we just jump onto the horse that's going to last. You see, we get off our little pony, our little identity, and we jump onto the chariot. So again, I think we're running out of time here. I try to make these a reasonable amount of time, but there's a lot of psychological insight about oneness and about a perception about our real nature that can be gained by looking outside, reflection of outside. You see the beauty and the proportion of beauty outside is exactly mirrored within. There's an inner beauty that makes this beauty outside almost like skin. You know, it's just almost like nothing. It's compared to the reality that we can experience, that we are, and the perceiver and the perceived are one. So thanks again for watching. I appreciate any of the feedback, and I always love that, and I try to keep learning all the time. I think people like this new format because I'm not a talking head. I can demonstrate things and so on. So I hope to inspire at least one or two people in this video. So thanks again. Please like and share.